"I saw you push her," Mrs. Rodriguez screamed as my 78-year-old grandmother lay crumpled on the ground beneath her balcony, blood seeping from her temple. Above, Karen, our HOA president, still clutched the balcony spindle she'd pulled out, her fake shock not matching the satisfied gleam in her eyes. "The railing just gave way," she lied. What Karen didn't know as the ambulance sirens wailed, she hadn't pushed some helpless old lady. She'd just assaulted the Honorable Justice Eleanor Mitchell, who spent 30 years on the Supreme Court making people like Karen face justice. It started with our fence, a beautiful hand-carved creation protecting Grandma's prize roses. Karen immediately targeted it. "This monstrosity violates HOA regulations," she declared, slapping down a citation with perfectly manicured nails. Grandma calmly explained her property predated the HOA by 20 years and was exempt. She even showed Karen the legal documentation she'd filed herself decades ago when still on the bench. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. "We'll see about that," she hissed, turning on her designer heel. No one defied her HOA power until she met Justice Mitchell. What started as a citation quickly escalated into psychological warfare. Every day brought new harassments, photographers measuring the fence's height, anonymous complaints about property values, threatening letters pushed under Grandma's doctor late at night. My grandmother, who had once faced down corrupt politicians without flinching, took it all in stride. "Justice doesn't need to shout," she'd always told me, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made courtroom opponents tremble for 30 years. "It simply needs to be right." The first real escalation came when I found Karen in Grandma's garden taking soil samples. "Environmental compliance check," she claimed, waving a fake-looking document. When Grandma politely asked her to leave, Karen accidentally trampled a row of prized heritage roses. Grandma's face tightened, but she remained composed. That evening, I noticed her making a phone call to her former clerk, now a detective with the county. A week later, Karen organized an emergency HOA meeting, scheduling it deliberately when my grandmother had a doctor's appointment. They voted unanimously to fine Grandma $100 daily until the fence was removed. When we returned to find the notice taped to the door, Grandma merely smiled. "Procedural error," she murmured, reaching for her leather-bound legal notepad. "Meeting. Notices must be delivered 14 days in advance according to their own bylaws." The next day, a building inspector arrived, suspiciously focusing only on Grandma's property. I overheard Karen outside, her voice low but intense. "Just find something, anything we can use." The inspector, uncomfortable, eventually left without issuing any violations. That night, Grandma installed small security cameras disguised as decorative elements around the property. "Preparation," she explained, "is the foundation of justice." Things took a darker turn when Karen's husband Bob began photographing Grandma's balcony from different angles. When confronted, he claimed he was admiring the architecture, but his measuring tape suggested otherwise. That evening, a brick crashed through Grandma's front window with a note, "Remove the fence or face consequences." The police came, took statements, but Karen played innocent, suggesting it was probably just kids. Grandma began documenting everything in a red folder. Photographs, statements from neighbors who'd witnessed Karen's harassment, copies of the threatening notes. I was concerned about her safety, but she remained unflappable. "I spent 30 years protecting the Constitution," she said, eyes twinkling. "I think I can handle one power-mad HOA president." The neighborhood started taking sides. Most supported Grandma, bringing her baked goods and offering to help with repairs. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street even installed her own camera facing Grandma's house for security purposes. But Karen had her supporters too. A small group who followed her around like sycophants, all holding positions in the HOA. Then came the water damage. During a heavy rainstorm, Grandma's basement flooded mysteriously. The plumber discovered that someone had deliberately redirected drainage toward her foundation. As he was fixing it, Karen appeared, feigning concern. "This old house has so many problems," she cooed. "You really should consider selling before it becomes uninhabitable." The plumber later told us Karen had asked him about vulnerabilities in the home structure just days earlier. I should have seen the warning signs. Karen's husband, Bob, had been measuring the distance between Grandma's fence and the property line, taking suspicious photographs of Grandma's balcony supports. When my grandmother caught them, they'd claim they were inspecting for structural integrity issues. But why would they care about the structural integrity of a house that wasn't theirs? Grandma finally confided in me her suspicions. "This isn't about the fence," she said, showing me property records she'd been researching. "Karen's brother owns a development company that's bought 6 properties in this neighborhood in the past year, all from elderly residents who sold well below market value after mysterious accidents and HOA harassments." She'd been building a case, methodically connecting the dots between the HOA board members and a web of shell companies. The day before the incident, Grandma received an ultimatum: remove the fence by tomorrow or face legal action and fines totaling thousands. Instead of responding, Grandma called her former colleagues at the courthouse. "Just making sure everything's in order," she told me cryptically. That night, through my window, I saw flashlights moving around the perimeter of the house. I wanted to call the police, but Grandma stopped me. "The cameras are recording everything," she said, her eyes hard. "Sometimes you need to let people reveal themselves fully before you act." The day it happened, I was helping Grandma tend her roses. Despite being nearly 80, she still climbed up to her second-floor balcony every morning to water her hanging plants. Constitutional law and gardening, she'd joke, both require patience and careful pruning. I'd gone inside to answer a phone call when I heard the commotion. Karen's voice, sharp and demanding, then a crash that made my blood run cold. I ran outside to find my grandmother lying on the ground, her small frame crumpled beside her beloved fence. Above, Karen stood on the balcony, her face a mask of fake shock as she clutched one of the decorative spindles that had clearly been removed from the railing. "She fell!" Karen shrieked, but her eyes told a different story. "The railing just gave way. I tried to help her." 2 of Karen's HOA cronies stood nearby, nodding in rehearsed agreement, but Mrs. Rodriguez was already calling out, "That's not." "What happened? I saw you push her." The ambulance ride felt eternal. Sitting beside my grandmother's stretcher, watching machines monitor her vital signs, I felt rage boiling inside me. Karen had followed us to the hospital, playing the concerned neighbor perfectly, clipboard still somehow clutched in her manicured hands. "Such a tragedy," she kept saying to anyone who would listen. "These old houses just aren't safe. The HOA has been warning about code violations for months." In the emergency room, doctors worked quickly. Miraculously, Grandma had no life-threatening injuries, a broken wrist, bruised ribs, and a mild concussion. "Fell just like I was taught in judicial self-defense training," she whispered to me when we were alone. "Tuck and roll. Even in pain." Her eyes were sharp, calculating. When she regained her strength, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Get my red folder from the study. It's time." As I left her room, I saw Karen in the hallway speaking urgently into her phone. "She's still conscious, but she won't be a problem anymore. We can move on the property by Friday." Our eyes met, and for a moment, her mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. The red folder contained 30 years of meticulous documentation, property surveys, deeds, legal opinions, and most importantly, a complete analysis of how the Sunny Pines HOA had been systematically abusing their authority for years. My grandmother hadn't just been growing roses in retirement, she'd been building a case. Justice Mitchell had noticed the pattern of harassment against elderly homeowners, the suspicious property transfers, the mysterious accidents that always seemed to clear the way for new development. She'd been collecting evidence, quietly interviewing affected homeowners, and documenting everything with the precision that had made her legendary on the bench. I also found a small USB drive labeled Security tucked inside. When I plugged it into my laptop, I gasped. Crystal clear footage showed Karen and Bob tampering with the balcony railing the night before, methodically loosening screws, testing the spindles to see which one would give way most easily. Another clip showed the moment of confrontation. Karen on the balcony, demanding Grandma sign immediate demolition papers for her non-compliant fence, then deliberately pushing her when she refused. The cameras had captured everything from multiple angles, leaving no room for denial. I immediately called Detective James, who arrived within the hour. I recognized him from family photos. He'd clerked for my grandmother early in his career, before joining law enforcement. He reviewed the footage in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head. "Classic Eleanor Mitchell preparation," he murmured. "Always 3 steps ahead." Karen was still in the hospital waiting room when Detective James approached her, tablet in hand. She was texting furiously. I later learned she was messaging the HOA board about expediting the fence removal, now that the stubborn old lady was out of the way. Her perfectly composed face crumbled as Detective James played the security footage right there in the waiting room. "Karen Williams," he began formally, "you're under arrest for assault and battery, attempted murder, and property tampering." Karen's designer purse slipped from her shoulder as the reality of her situation dawned on her. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "Do you know who I am? I'm the president of the Sunny Pines HOA. My husband plays golf with Judge Harrison." "Detective," James smiled slightly. "And do you know who Eleanor Mitchell is?" he asked quietly. Before she retired to grow roses, Justice Mitchell wrote the precedent-setting opinion on property rights that every first-year law student studies. She mentored half the judges in this state, including Judge Harrison, who I believe just signed this search warrant for your home and the HOA offices. Karen's face went pale as she recognized my grandmother's name for the first time. The retired Justice Eleanor Mitchell, whose landmark rulings on property rights and community governance had shaped housing law for a generation. The same Eleanor Mitchell who had written the dissenting opinion in Davis versus Highland Creek, arguing that homeowners associations must be held to the same standards of transparency and due process as any government entity. The woman Karen had just pushed off a balcony had literally written the book on the legal limits of HOA power. "This is just a misunderstanding," Karen stammered, backing toward the door. "The old woman is confused. She fell. Everyone knows these accusations are just confused ramblings of an elderly person." Detective James's face hardened. That confused elderly person correctly cited case law while being loaded into the ambulance, Mrs. Williams. Her mental faculties are sharper than most attorneys I know, and we have 3 witnesses and video evidence of you tampering with the balcony and pushing her. The investigation moved with remarkable speed. Search warrants revealed what my grandmother had suspected all along. Karen and her husband had been targeting elderly homeowners using HOA violations and harassment to force them to sell their properties below market value to a development company owned by Karen's brother. The architectural committee that had rejected my grandmother's fence consisted only of Karen and her husband. The HOA bank accounts showed hundreds of thousands in missing funds, siphoned off through fake contractor invoices that all led back to shell companies owned by Karen's family. As Karen sat in jail denied bail, More victims came forward. 12 elderly homeowners testified about harassment, vandalism, and intimidation tactics. Financial records showed how Karen had used HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, home renovations, and even her daughter's wedding. Building inspectors testified about being pressured to find violations in targeted homes. 3 weeks later, I wheeled my grandmother into the courtroom for Karen's arraignment. Though still bruised and using a walking cane that might become permanent, Justice Mitchell sat tall, her eyes sharp as ever. The courtroom fell silent as people recognized her, attorneys, judges, and court staff all standing respectfully as she entered. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her designer outfit replaced by a simple pantsuit, her highlighted hair now showing dark roots after weeks in custody. Judge Harrison, who had indeed played golf with Karen's husband, but had also clerked for my grandmother 30 years earlier, recused himself immediately. "This case will be heard by Judge Martinez from the neighboring county," he announced, to avoid any appearance of bias, given my professional relationship with Justice Mitchell. Karen's attorney approached us during a recess, offering a deal. She would plead to lesser charges in exchange for my grandmother dropping her civil suit. Justice Eleanor Mitchell, who had stared down corrupt governors and organized crime bosses without blinking, merely smiled. "Counselor," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of 3 decades on the bench. "Your client didn't just attack me, she attacked the rule of law. She used rules meant to protect communities as weapons against the vulnerable. There will be no deals today." 6 months later, Karen Williams was sentenced to 8 years for assault, fraud, and racketeering. The judge cited Justice Mitchell's own words from a landmark case about community governance in her sentencing decision. "Power exercised without accountability corrupts not just the wielder, but the entire system it purports to serve." The community rallied around us. Mrs. Rodriguez organized meal deliveries during my grandmother's recovery. The local Woodworkers Guild volunteered to restore and reinforce her balcony with beautiful hand-carved railings that matched her fence. Former law clerks and colleagues visited regularly, turning her living room into an impromptu legal clinic for neighbors dealing with HOA issues. As for my grandmother's fence, it still stands, more beautiful than ever, now listed as a historic neighborhood landmark, protected from any future HOA interference. Justice Eleanor Mitchell sits beside it most evenings, tending her roses and offering legal advice to neighbors who stop by. The most ironic part: the property where Karen's house once stood has been converted into a community garden named after my grandmother, where neighborhood kids learn about plants, sustainability, and occasionally, when Justice Mitchell is feeling energetic, the constitutional foundations of property rights. As Grandma likes to say while pruning her award-winning roses, some people never learn that the law, like nature, always finds its balance in the end.